We are heading into week 16 of the season, and for a lot of you, round 2 of the fantasy football playoffs. I'm going to give you my starts and sits at the wide receiver position. I'm going to try and focus on players that are kind of on the edge, that aren't those obvious starts for you. One or two might be, but with good matchups, guys that I think you can rely on for most of you who are probably in the second round of your playoffs. Okay, do me a favor, drop a like, subscribe if you like the content, and comment down below if you had some sort of crazy win in the first round or even to get into the playoffs. All right, my first start of the week at the wide receiver position is a rookie, and he's been playing really well. That is Garrett Wilson versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jacksonville currently gives up the 11th most points to fantasy wide receivers. Last week, both CeeDee Lamb and Noah Brown had big games. We're talking about Garrett Wilson, who hopefully it's Mike White, right? We prefer it to be Mike White, but even last week saw over 13.5 PPR fantasy points. And the past 4 weeks combined, he has averaged 9.75 targets a game, and including last week with Zach Wilson, where he had 9 targets rather in the game. So he seems to be one of these safe plays. He's clearly the dominant wide receiver on this team. He's going to easily give you a floor of about 10 points with the ceiling of what we've seen, which is about a 25 to 30 point ceiling. Good game. Both teams should be competitive in this game as they fight for the playoffs. So I like Garrett Wilson as a start here. My second start of the week, he's been up, he's been down, but every time I've told you to start him, it has paid off this year, and that has been Devonta Smith. So we are going to go ahead and say start Devonta Smith here in week 16. He plays the Cowboys. Dallas currently gives up the 8th most points to fantasy wide receivers. And how I imagine this matchup going is Trevon Diggs mainly guarding AJ Brown, which means that Devonta Smith is going to have to play a key part. We have seen that a lot this year, where the number one cornerback is guarding AJ Brown, and Devonta Smith has had his opportunity. So I like this game for Devonta Smith. Last time he played Dallas, which was in week 6, he had 15.4 PPR fantasy points, and he got into the end zone. So imagine if he gets into the end zone again, but he has more yardage. True 20 plus point ceiling, but I would say a safe 12 to 15 point floor this week in what should be a high scoring affair with 2 of the NFC East best teams. All right, my third start of the week, again, trying to give you players that are kind of on that edge. Okay, there are obviously better starts in this player that are also less risky, but I think it's a good matchup, and I think you can take advantage of it this week. DJ Moore versus the Lions. Detroit currently gives up the 3rd most points to fantasy wide receivers. We have seen it week in and week out. Wide receivers have dominated against Detroit. Somehow, even Garrett Wilson was a good start, relatively, versus this team with Zach Wilson as his quarterback. DJ Moore, last time out versus the Steelers, had 6 targets, caught 5 of them for 73 yards and a touchdown. Now has a very good matchup. So he's clearly the best player on this offense, and this team is going to continue to try and push for the playoffs in such a weak division. So I think DJ Moore should be a good play. All right, my next start of the week, a little bit more obvious, but in case there's anyone out there who kind of is like, I've got, this star player and this one, and I don't know what to do. DK Metcalf is a must start, locked and loaded into your lineups. Doesn't matter what your options are. DK Metcalf is a must start at the Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs currently give up the 4th most points to fantasy wide receivers. I've said it all year long. Patrick Mahomes covers a lot of the Chiefs' sins. As a Chiefs fan myself, I watch the games, and our secondary definitely is probably bottom 10 in the NFL. As of right now, like I said, we give up the 4th most points to the position. No Tyler Lockett, so DK Metcalf could be locked into like a 10 to 15 target type performance here versus the Chiefs. Now, what will he convert? We'll have to wait and see, but we've seen success with Geno. You got to ride this start with DK Metcalf. All right, I'm going to give you 2 desperation starts, okay? The first one being Darius Slayton at the Vikings. Darius Slayton's coming off a game versus Washington, who is very good against fantasy wide receivers. You don't want to play against Washington. He saw 7 targets, caught 5 of them for 23 yards. I think this will be a bounce back game for Darius Slayton. He plays the Vikings, who currently give up the 2nd most points to wide receivers, so they're a very, very good matchup. Again, desperation start, but we have seen the Vikings consistently give up big points. even Michael Pittman, who, yes, granted, wasn't able to get into the end zone, but still saw over 19 PPR fantasy points, a big bounce back game for him. I expect Slayton to give you at least 10 points in this matchup. And my last desperation flex, and again, I'm going to say the same thing that I said last week. If there's no Brandon Cooks and no Nico Collins, you can start Chris Moore. It is another good matchup. And while Chris Moore didn't convert on his opportunities, he still saw those opportunities this week. He had 9 targets. Now, I know it didn't work out, but he could have a similar target share next week versus the Titans. He now goes from the 4th best matchup versus the Chiefs to the best matchup in fantasy football, which is the Titans. Again, desperation start. If Cooks or Nico Collins plays, you can't start Chris Moore, but their situations look a little bit unknown. So Chris Moore, again, desperation scenario. Players got hurt for you, or you need to fill that last flex. Chris Moore is a viable option, and both quarterbacks are targeting him. All right, I'm gonna give you 3 sits here, players that I'm not comfortable starting. Let's start with a couple wide receiver rooms in general. The first one is the Rams wide receiver room versus the Broncos. Ben Skoranek, Van Jefferson, Tutu, I don't care who it is. Probably even in deeper formats, like you don't want to start a wide receiver. I know Baker Mayfield's there. I know, there's still uncertainty, of course, but there's not a Rams receiver I want to start versus this defense that gives up the second fewest points to fantasy wide receivers. It's a bad matchup. I don't think you should chase it. Even if you're in a desperate spot, I would much rather start a Darius Slayton or a Chris Moore. The same can be said with any Titans wide receivers versus the Texans. And yes, this includes Treylon Burks. I don't want to risk it with Treylon Burks in the second round of the fantasy playoffs in what is a really bad matchup. And it's not even because the Texans secondary is elite by any means, but teams beat the Texans on the ground. That's just been the formula all year. And I think we're going to see that with one of the biggest run-focused teams in the NFL, the Titans. Derrick Henry should have a field day. And if Treylon Burks is back, I'm glad. I love him. But I don't want to play him with my fantasy hopes on the line versus the Texans, who give up the 3rd fewest points to the position. And my 3rd sit at the wide receiver position is Jacoby Myers. This has nothing to do with the terrible decision to lateral it. I feel bad for him, to be honest. That's a rough go. But he plays the Bengals, who give up the 5th fewest points to the position. It's not a good week to start any Patriot not named Ramondre Stevenson. All of the rest of them should be on your bench. So those are my starts and sits at the wide receiver position. I hope you get the championship. I hope you get to the final round. For us, most of our leagues are championship next week. So hopefully you're able to get to that point. I hope this helps. Again, like the video, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yo, what's good? Thanks for watching. We got a lot more videos.
A lot more.
If you want more videos.
Watch it.
You can also subscribe.
Right now.
If you want to.
You need to.
And lastly, don't forget that you can sign up to support the show and get exclusive content by going to patreon.com/FantasyLand fam.